it's better if you stay
Quiet, everyone!
Okay.
Quiet!
So,
Go to the truck.
Folks.
Stop talking.
Yep. So first things first here. You already heard one of the first volleys of comments that I was going to offer here on the tour. The site where we are standing. In fact, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to do this because I have my tablet where I've got my reading text and things that I'm going to use, but I also have some pictures that I would like to show you guys. Now, you can pass this around, or if you think you can see it from where you're standing, that will be great. Let me take this out. I don't need this in here. If things go according to plan, we are starting and finishing this tour as much as is possible at sites that are actually as intimately linked to Jack Kerouac's father, Leo, as to Jack Kerouac himself. In fact, now if you look in this direction here, in fact, see where the blue sign is right over here. This is Massachusetts Mills. Well, at one point in time, the sign that stood there was, in fact, this one. Okay? This photograph was taken about a half year before Leo Kerouac's spotlight print plan. Okay? And if we go right across the canal here, the farthest back building on the opposite side of that is where Jack Kerouac's father's printing plant was. So if you look in the lower right-hand corner here, you will see Spotlight Print, General Printers, and you can pass this around if you want. Okay. So this place here was very, very, very important, not just to Kerouac. His father ate at the diner over here. There was a competing diner right across the street that would have been very, very proximal for his father, like going to work on a daily basis. And one of the prime kind of employers for Jack's father's services were theaters, and that's actually a couple of the sites we're going to see along the way today are old movie theaters that are associated with the heyday of Lowell cinema, which actually reached something of a peak right during the 1930s when Jack Kerouac was a young man. So let me start off here, guys, by reading a passage, hopefully significantly different enough from the things we've heard so far. Okay. I like to open with this one because this kind of situates us very much in the place where we're standing right now. It says, "The mystery of the Lowell night extends to the heart of downtown. It lurks in the shadows of the red brick walls." In fact, the recurrent image of red brick comes up in basically all of Jack Kerouac's major works. And if you're ever wondering, well, where does that come from? Turn around, take a look. Because literally this town is constructed of red brick. And here's another passage. That first little bit was from Dr. Sachs. This is from The Town and the City. It's a little lengthier. It says, "The grown-ups of Galloway." Galloway is what Kerouac renames Lowell in his first novel, The Town and the City. "The grown-ups of Galloway are less concerned with riverside broodings. They work in factories and shops and stores and offices and on the farms all around. The textile factories built in brick, grimly towered, solid, are ranged along the rivers and the canals. And all night the industries hum and shuttle. This is Galloway, mill town in the middle of fields and forests. If at night a man goes out to the woods surrounding Galloway and stands on a hill, he can see it all there before him in broad panorama. The river coursing slowly in an arc, the mills with their long rows of windows all aglow, the factory stacks rising higher than the church steeples. But he knows that this is not the true Galloway." Well, it's as much the true Galloway, I guess, as anything else, because without these mills, okay, which starting in the 1830s, these mills started popping up and they kind of reached their peak of operations around the turn of the century. Without these mills, would have been hard to have the infrastructure that allowed Leo Kerouac to have a small independent printing plant at the time. All of the wonderful entertainment that they had, which is of course kind of an adjunct to the 24-hour-a-day operations of the mills. So why this town? Why so many mills here? Do any of you know anything about the history of this town, its relationship to mill culture? what made this place so special that you have this huge array of mills?
The water drops about 30 feet, I think.
Yeah, in little more than a mile's distance, you have a 30-foot drop in the amount of water, the kind of distance the water goes, and that produces enough force that you are able to, in fact, generate about 10,000 horsepower, power, 7,500 kilowatts of power. So basically, the water that we're gonna cross over a number of times today is so essential to the story of not just Jack Kerouac's Lowell, but that's one of the reasons why the Merrimack River and the various canals are recurrent images in his books. I mean, they were kind of the arteries of the city that connected one section to the next, but also connected the town kind of economically and even culturally. So, let's do this, okay? If that book has gone around somewhere, I just want to turn it to the next page here. Guys, this is the great gray warehouse of eternity that's referred to in Visions of Gerard. Literally, this huge 11-story building, the current Morton warehouse, consolidated warehouse, stood right here, 11 stories tall. It towered over everything else here. This is an archival photograph from 1921 or thereabouts. And if you're standing at the perspective from which it was taken, you can see the Lowell Sun building here. You can see the theater district, or at least a portion of the theater district that we're going to be moving towards as we make our way down the street. So this was a really central hub of activity. Now, not the main hub, but you had so much activity going on. It might be a little surprising that most of what we see here now is just kind of traffic, but the volumes of people that spent time here during Kerouac's day, pretty remarkable. So visualize, the amount of activity that's represented in this photograph. I think what an exciting time that it must have been. Where we are standing right here, where the bicycle shop is. The bicycle shop is exactly where Pfds Theatre. Now, it hasn't been there. It was raised in the late 1970s. Now, really just the kind of small business. But one of the things that's so fascinating about this particular place, it, like the warehouse and housing for mill workers, a lot of the stuff was built during the first decade of the 20th century. So all of these things kind of came up at the same time and flourished. A typical theater night at Pfds Theatre looked like this. Yep, RKO Keith. It was renamed from BF Keith to RKO Keith in 1933. Now, in addition to sponsoring a couple of local area Lowell schools, Keith Academy, there's a kind of a Keith Academy for both boys and girls. This theater was the most popular vaudeville theater at the time of Kerouac's boyhood. In fact, for those of you who have not read any of Kerouac's Lowell books, if you're familiar only with On the Road, none of these places are likely going to have mention there. Maybe they'll get a peripheral mention in one of the other books, but in a book, for instance, like Maggie, Cassidy, or a book like Visions of Gerard, one of the most significant scenes in that book takes place right here. There's a little alleyway that used to lead to the back of the theater and the doors where the entertainers used to go in and out. Jack Kerouac's father mingled with a lot of theater people because, well, he wrote and printed playbills. He wrote a little entertainment newspaper called the Lowell Spotlight for a period of time. And he used to like to go to after-hours card games with the various entertainers. And one of the more memorable descriptions in Visions of Gerard is one such after-hours poker game with W.C. And let's just say that there's a lot of drinking, and there's a lot of carousing, there's a lot of, very exuberant kind of description of the shenanigans that took place. But it's a necessary respite in that book. If you've ever read Visions of Gerard is Kerouac's book. It's elegy for his older brother, who died when Kerouac was 4 years old. His brother was only 9, and that book is just filled with sadness. It's filled with, sometimes it's even somewhat pathetic in the sense that it's almost unbearably sad at times. So the sequence here where we get this wonderful description of what's going on, and Kerouac also describes how, his dad got to meet the Marx Brothers here in 1927. So his father really hobnobbed with theater people, but also Kerouac saw a lot of movies here for free. In fact, Kerouac saw most of his movies for free at the various theaters because his father did printing jobs for him. So they get free tickets. Now this one was probably better known initially as a vaudeville theater, became ultimately maybe better known as a movie theater. And I don't know about you, but I've never been to a movie premiere, even in I think larger cities with that kind of turnout. I think this turnout. So for what it's worth, guys, and we can't really see, the evidence anymore. There is one great quote that I wanted to share with you, having to do with the theater. I can find it real quickly here. Okay, here it is. There was an alley downtown among the soft red brick of Keith's Theater and the Bridge Street warehouse, the area where we just left, with a red neon candy store of antique Saturday nights of funny, still smelling of ink and strawberry ice cream sodas, all pink and frothy with dew on top. And Dana's, across the street from the alley, Dana's is right here in this building. Okay? In the alley itself, there were cinders leading to the stage door. Something there was so fantastically sad about this alley. In it, the living W.C. Fields had walked, headed from a rainy afternoon stint in the 6-ad vaudeville with gaping masks, twirling that old bull balloon cane, W.C. Fields and the tragic Marx Brothers of early times, swaying precariously from immense ladders and goofing in an awful holocaust of great stage sorrow, all huge with drapes and jello rippling flop props in the middle of the day, 1927. Now, this area, obviously, you can see that most of this is actually going to be churches. Here's a conversation on housing and all these historical purposes. But a lot of the businesses here no longer exist. Now we have to be standing on the other side to see it, but this is what Dana's look like. Kerouac is one of the great literary gourmands, I think, of all time. He describes food, he describes eating with a great deal of gusto, and one of his favorite places to go when he was a young guy and he had dates, was here, or not too far down the street where we're going to kind of head to next, where he could take his special girl out for a late night ice cream soda, walking under the neon lights of Kearny Square, which we will get to. Now guys, this is obviously Middlesex Community College, but this is not what was here during Kerouac. In fact, some of the most poignant, romantic, beautiful sequences that Kerouac ever writes about in any of his books took place at an entertainment complex that was once right here. That entertainment complex was called the Rex Ballroom or the Rex Center. Now, if during Kerouac's 30s, adolescence, he decided that he wanted to go duckpin bowling, go here. If you wanted to see a big band concert, they had a between 1,000 and 2,000 seat concert venue. You would come here. Weddings, receptions, banquets were held here. If you wanted to go to a wrestling match, you would see it here. If you wanted to go to the Turkish baths, you would go here. In fact, there's a Lowell historian that says, something to the effect that it's impossible to estimate just how many people either fell in love or finally formalized their love for one another at this very site. Now, up to my picture, the current photograph here.
Do you know what year it was torn down?
Well, it wasn't torn down. It burned down. Okay? So guys, here are two pictures right here of the rec center. Now, it existed a good distance back. It was probably the closest thing to a one-stop entertainment experience for Lowell residents starting in 1933. It existed until 1960 when this major fire destroyed the complex. What was left ultimately had to be razed. This building that's here was once actually part of Long Industries, a computer firm that used to be here. Now, like lots of buildings right downtown and even on the periphery, they've been taken over, repurposed by the various colleges here, UMass or Middlesex Community College. So this is what it looked like. Now, that's not a very flattering set of images. It's kind of sad. Please feel free to pass those around.
Did they determine what caused the fire?
I believe it was a problem in the electrical system. A lot of these buildings, like for instance, when the rec center was actually put in here, it's not what the buildings were originally used for. So sometimes, especially during the Great Depression, when they were kind of moving from one kind of industry to another, there probably wasn't the set of stringent kind of safety regulations that existed at the time. So I'm not going to repeat this. Part of this was already read at the commemorative, but I love this. At the beginning of Maggie Cassidy, one of Jack's very, very best, and maybe his most successful Lowell novel, it's one that documents his adolescent romance with a young South Lowell girl named Mary Carney. He talks about how he and his buddies on New Year's Eve are on their way out to go here to a dance. And while his friend GJ Apostles, Kerouac's best friend during his adolescence, while GJ is singing, they're all kind of lost not just in the sound of GJ's cracked and not very melodious voice, but they're also thinking about what's to come when they get here. Arm in arm, they all scuffled to the New Year's Eve dance at the Rex Ballroom. Their first dance, each one, their first and last future before them. The Rex Ballroom, with coat attendants in a drafty hall, a window, coat room racks, fresh snow spilled on the boards, the rosy girls and handsome boys running in, the boys clacking heels, the girls in high heels, short dresses in the 30s showing sexy legs. With awe, we teenagers gave up our coats, got our brass discs, walked into the great sigh of the ballroom, all six with fear, unknown sorrows. The band was on the stand, a young band, some 17-year-old musicians, tenors, trombones, old pianists, a young leader. They struck up the sad lament of the ballad. The smoke from my cigarette climbs through the air. The dancers meet, engaged, shuffled, powder on the floor, lights playing in polka dots around the hall with its upstairs balcony where cool young sitters watched. The six boys stood at the entrance, undecided, raw, foolish, turning sheepish smiles to one another for support, starting off in a halting gang, down the wall, past the wallflowers, the cold windows of winter, the seats, the other gangs of boys stiff-collared and swift, a sudden group of jitterbugs with long hair and pegged hands. A bird of sadness whirled slowly around the room with polka dots, singing love and death. The walls of my room fade away in the blue, and I'm deep in a dream of you. So Kerouac describes this whole rich sensory experience of sights and sounds and smells, right down to the finest details of the little brass discs they used to give people on the way in, their kind of their token, their ticket. Now, the first time he actually meets and sees Mary Carney, the Maggie Cassidy of his most romantic book, is here. The first time he dances with her is here later that night. So there are scenes in Maggie Cassidy that are about as sweet, bittersweet as anything that Kerouac ever wrote. It takes place right here. So I really wish I'd gotten to see photographs, and there aren't very many excellent photographs of the place without fire and smoke. Is the binder moving around a little bit somewhere? Okay, let me just show you one image that's a little bit closer to, I guess, favorable. Guys, if we were standing, you'll see the monument down here, the kind of obelisk, the kind of stone monument. Yeah, that's right there. So if you're looking in this direction, right, you can see the Rex Grill, you can see the whole huge Rex Center here. the Lowell Sun building in the background, okay, Kearny Square. So you didn't have quite as much foliage. Things were a little bit more open then. But this is a nice photograph showing the Rex. This would have been actually in the late 1940s, 48 or thereabouts.
Sorry, which is Rex?
The Rex is right here. See right where it says Rex Grill right there. And also, I failed to mention, it was actually one of the most popular, slightly more upscale restaurants at the time. So, folks, believe it or not, wedged into this very small area where we're standing right here, at one point in time was one of the the most popular first-run movie theaters here in Lowell, called the Strand. Now, this is actually a lineup, I believe this is 1939 or 1940. This is the rather impressive inside of the theater. I've tried to visualize, it's like, it just doesn't seem possible that you could have fit a venue that appears to be so big, but it's actually maybe deceptively large in the photograph, okay? The Strand Theater was where, of course, Kerouac would also go to the movies. It was kind of his third favorite choice of places to see movies because his father had a better deal going on with the Royal Theater and with Pfds Theatre. But a couple of his friends actually worked here, and Jack would often, because of its proximity, and it's just enough off the beaten track that if you wanted to play hooky from school, everybody was going to be looking for the students playing hooky right over at like Pfds Theatre. So they're like, well, we got to get a little farther away than that. So this one was just far enough away that no one, gets just dark enough that no one would come to look for him over here.
When was that one torn down, that theater?
This theater actually was, there was structure here, even with this, up until quite recently, even I think until the 1990s. So this theater, the structure stood there, but it hadn't been in operation for, I think, almost 30 years. It's just been sitting here kind of empty, not doing anything.
With the brick units or the white tile?
No, literally right here. Okay, right here. Yeah.
When you say theater, you say there are lots of theaters with big theater industry. Is that movie theaters or just standard theaters with like actors?
Most of the theaters at the time, okay, to answer your question, and this is just a selection of them. This is a group of theaters. This is from the 1936 Lowell Resident Directory. If you're researchers, they're wonderful resources to use if you're trying to confirm a street address, etc. But here are some of the more popular ones. Most of these places played both. Most of them played both vaudeville, like live performance acts. Okay, for instance, the Lowell Opera House did that. BFK's Theater did that. The Crown Theater did that. While others, like the Strand and the Royal, were exclusively movie theaters. So you had a combination. In fact, guys, we're not going to walk down here any farther than this, but if you literally, where we're standing right now, the Strand is 128. If you go down here, there is, did any of you do the opening night, the pub crawl tour? Okay. Cappy's, there's a very popular kind of watering hole here. Actually, that's the site where the Rialto Theater once was. Down at the kind of intersection here, that you kind of have this V, we'll do that in a second, is the 300 block. So you had the Lowell Opera. So this was actually called Theater Row down through here. At one point in time, the distance from here down to that intersection where there's a Chinese restaurant, I believe it's still a Chinese restaurant,
yes.
There were actually 5 operating theaters in just this short distance.
So with the Chinese restaurant, is that approximately where the opera was?
Yep. Yes.
How did the Lowell have so many theaters? Did everybody always go to the theater? Because that's a lot of theaters.
Well, if you think about, for instance, in the 1930s, mass media was such, people didn't have television in their homes yet. So if you wanted, like, the news, you either listened to the radio or you would go see the newsreels that were kind of the in-between, like the intermission stuff. Like, you know, if you wanted to watch cartoons, it's like you couldn't turn the TV on at home. Literally cartoons, most cartoons at the time were actually made to be played in theaters. They were sort of like, you know, again, like intermission material between the feature films. And films were so inexpensive. Like, sometimes you were talking 10 cents a quarter to get in for a movie ticket at the time. So you had enough people who had, because the wartime economies here in Lowell were always very, very robust. In fact, one of the problems and one of the reasons why they say like the mills stopped being viable for Lowell was after the wartime boom, there just wasn't the demand anymore for the products they were producing here. And the infrastructure was such that you just couldn't easily convert it to something else. Like, what do we do with this now? What do we turn it into? So it really wasn't until the 1970s, 1980s when they started thinking about the town more as like possible site for visit for historical interest that you saw a lot of these buildings. Because to me, it's sad that there's not one of the old historic Lowell theaters in existence anymore. There literally none of these movie theaters exist. And Kerouac spent so much time here, really like ridiculous. Now, and guys, just again to show you, here's the Rialto Theater. That's one that's just down here a little bit farther. And I always like this image because it shows Kerouac is really fascinated by moonlight and street lights, and he just loves. So there's something about this dimly lit street here where you have the Rialto Theater kind of pointing in the direction of the extension here of Central Ave.
Do you know when the oldest theater was built and if it played silent movies?
Yeah, actually, most of the films, almost none of the theaters would have played anything but silent films up to the late 1920s. So if you look, there are theaters that date back to the turn of the century. And the first really popular one, it's really going to be the last site we visit on the tour. That's over on Merrimack Street. That one has a history that goes back to about 1908, but it really starts operating kind of full-time as a theater in the very, very early teens, so 1910, 1911. So, yeah.
When did these theaters get torn down?
Variably. Yeah.
When Middlesex rebuilt the theater at the end of the block, what theater was there originally, and did they pay any tribute to what was there originally? Or they just kind of start from scratch and make a new thing altogether?
That's exactly what they did. Yeah, there was no attempt to kind of, like, let's make this theater, let's put a theater on the site of one of the historic theaters. It was just, because some of these properties were really, really so primarily located. And think about it, guys, 5 theaters, how was any economy going to be able to support that? Especially since the most popular theaters were kind of this way, and Central is certainly one of the main streets here. But when people thought about entertainment, it was Market Street, it's Merrimack Street. So once people stopped coming to these, they fell pretty quickly. But sometimes, and I guess that's what I like about them, the buildings lasted long enough that people were able to document them pretty extensively. But I love the fact, by the way, that there's a photograph in the inside of this one. But anyhow, just one quick passage and we'll move on. Okay. Okay, and at the beginning of this passage, Jack Kerouac says we. He's talking about himself, his father, Leo Kerouac, and Peggy Coffey, the other kind of girl who has Kerouac's romantic interest in Maggie Cassidy. Because Kerouac is kind of keeping time with 2 separate girls who kind of know about one another. I'll let you speculate there all you like. Okay. It says, we join the flow of the sidewalks leading downtown to the Lobster Cot, Merrimack Street, the Strand, the whole dense, almost riotous inwards of the city aglow for the Saturday night in that time only 15 years ago, when not everybody had cars and people walked to shop and from buses to shows. Not everything was locked in strange behind tin walls with anxious eyes looking out to deserted sidewalks of modern America. Pauline, Pa, and I could not have laughed and experienced excitement and jumped so joyously as we did that night if we'd been in some automobile grimly buried 3 in a front seat, haggling over traffics in the window of the television set of Time. Instead, we loped on foot over snowbanks to dry shoveled sidewalks of downtown, to busy revolving doors of wild midnight sodas. Now, wild midnight soda, I'm not sure how wild a soda is, but Kerouac's always very fanciful when it comes to his sodas and his ice cream and his apple pie. Yeah, here's towards here in the Fairburn building, towards the Growth Center block right here. Okay, that's where the Lee Chop Suey sign is. Okay, this is right where we're standing right now. This is the heart of downtown Lowell. This was where you had quick access to the post office. This is where you actually had the most popular newspaper in Lowell. This was the main downtown transportation hub. There was a cab company here, bus stops. So this picture here gives a pretty good, obviously this is, we were feeling very, very victorious after the war. But if you see archival photographs from this period, on a typical, Saturday night, there was a lot of activity here. Now, why here? Okay, why this building? Okay. Well, first off, this is the Lowell Sun. This is probably architecturally the most recognizable landmark in downtown Lowell. Okay, you look, okay. The Lowell Sun building here. Two Kerouacs had offices in this particular building. During the late teens and early 1920s, Leo Kerouac, before he became an independent printer, before he really got into print typesetting and really to learn the printer, he was actually an insurance salesman for Metropolitan Life, 7th floor, rooms 704 and 706. He worked for a gentleman named C.B. Redway, who had an insurance, franchise. Okay, so he had an office here. Well, 20 years later, 20 plus years later, when Jack Kerouac is on leave from Columbia University, he's back in town and he's looking for a job. He comes here thinking maybe I can get like a paper delivery route or something of that sort. Well, he doesn't get a paper delivery route, but he does end up with an office on the 4th floor here. And I'll let folks want to handle this and they can pass it around. Okay? And I'll share with you a passage from probably one of the lesser read of Jack's Lowell books, because not the entire thing focuses on Lowell, okay? But my favorite sections do. Anyhow, so this is Jack talking about his attempt to get work here at the Lowell Sun building. And it says, all I was supposed to do was wait for the Navy V2 program to call me up for an examination into whether I should be in the Naval Air Force. So, meanwhile, to get that job, I went to the Lowell Sun and asked to see the owner of the newspaper, Jim Mayo, to see whether I could be hired as a trucker's helper delivering files from newspapers to the dealers. He said, aren't you the Jack Doulawas who was a football star a few years ago in Lowell High in New York? At Yale it was? Columbia. And you were preparing for journalism? Why should you be a delivery boy? Here, you take this note to go into the sports desk and tell them I want you to start right in Monday morning as a sports reporter. What the heck, boy? Clap on the back. We're not all hicks around here. $15 a week do okay as a starter? He didn't ask. In those days, employers didn't ask. But I thrilled temporarily at the thought of whipping out my college sports coat and pants and regaining the old necktie glamour at a desk in the bright morning of men and business things. So through January and February, I was the sports writing cub for the Lowell Sun. My pa was very proud. In fact, on several occasions, he got a day's work running a linotype in the press room, and I used to proudly bring him one of my typewritten stories, say about Lowell High basketball, and give it to him on his rack, and we'd smile. Stick to it, kid.
What book was that?
This is from Vanity of Doulawas. Okay, now, one of the things that I find very, very interesting here about Kerouac's time, if that book is still going around, if you flip a page or two, you will get an example. Actually, no, I don't think I have it here. You have a sample of Jack Kerouac's sports journalism for the Lowell Sun. Now, for those of you who don't know this, we'll talk a little bit more about when we get to Lowell High School. Jack was a bona fide sports star. Okay. This year, in addition to being the 60th anniversary of the publication of Dharma Bums, is the 80th anniversary of the highlight, the pinnacle of Jack Kerouac's high school sports career. The rivalry between Lowell High School and Lawrence High School was such that their annual Thanksgiving football game was a big, big deal. Now, I don't know if any of you played high school sports. Think about how many people attended a typical high school sports, like football game. Well, anyone have an idea?
5,000. 5,000?
Yeah, maybe 5,000. Friday Night Lights, you get 25,000, 30,000 in Texas. Well, they had 14,000 people who showed up in 1938 to watch Lowell High School win on a last-minute touchdown run by Jack Kerouac. There's an iconic photograph of him like falling over the line with the ball, and he was known for fumbling the ball, so he was like, hold it with two hands. So when he showed up, it's actually probably just a little bit self-effacement for Kerouac to show up here asking for a job. You're like, aren't you the one who was the sports star just a couple of years earlier? So this is where he plied his trade. You read his sports journalism, and it's terrible. It's the most wildly overwritten. You're like, oh my God, soften it with the adjectives in the SAT level vocabulary words. You know, just you take them. So if anyone is the least bit interested, if you even read a couple of passages, you're going, a lot of purple prose for sports prose. So he didn't last long. He actually worked here from late January through March and pretty consistently produced copy for them. So he certainly earned his money. It's just not the most memorable writing like Jack Kerouac. Folks, Shin Lee Company. I want to take a couple of minutes to tell you about one of the favorite eateries that the Kerouac family would regularly attend. Now, Lowell actually was very, very kind of politically progressive and socially progressive. In fact, the first truly integrated school systems in the United States of America were actually located here. And because of Jack's father's connections within the business community and anyone who needed advertisement, he knew all of the local businesses. But one of their favorite places to eat was once housed right here. Okay? It's a place called Shin Lee Company. In fact, Jack Kerouac's father was very, very good friends with Chin Yu, who was the owner of this particular chain. Now, it's hard to imagine now because it's really pretty nondescript looking, but this restaurant had not just a beautiful banquet hall, but they had a ballroom. They had their own dance band, like literally that played there like every night. And the main entrance to the place is actually down the next street here. So getting into this place was actually, you know, a little bit of a kind of a mystery in and of itself. So I'll pass this around. This is from the business's 1908 location. In fact, they have a history that goes all the way back to the first decade of the 20th century. This is an advertisement from the 1936 Lowell Directory, which, as you can see, Union Dance Orchestra every evening, 9 to 12. And I love, by the way, special supper, 35 cents and up. Wow, indeed.
This exact structure?
Yes.
Yeah, it's actually, the building is the exact same building. Now, if you look here, okay, you can see the bank building. Can you see the pillars right there? And just off, you have Shin Lee. So the building right next to it used to have a big Shin Lee sign. Now, we can't see it. We can't see the surface until we walk past it a little bit. But yeah, if you want to see the Shin Lee stuff, here are the ads. And this is the inside of the restaurant before it was taken over by Chin Lee. It used to be called Young China Restaurant, but this is the same place at 65 Merrimack Street.
So Chin Lee also served Chinese food?
Yes, they actually served a lot of American fare there also, but Kerouac describes, I think with more zeal, this place than any other eatery in town. So here, if someone wants to take that and you want to pass it around and look at some of the pictures, let me give you a sense of how much the Kerouac family enjoyed Shin Lee. And this is from Dr. Sachs, my favorite of Kerouac's novels. Change your clothes, we're going to eat at Shin Lee's. This is Kerouac's father. Shin Lee, oh boy. It was the ideal place on sad red Sundays. We drove with Ma and Nin would be his sister Caroline, in the old 34 Plymouth over the Moody Street Bridge. It used to be, we follow this down, a little less than a mile here, okay, over the Rocks of Eternity, and down Merrimack Street, the very street we're standing on. In parlous solitudes of the Sabbath, past the church, St. Jean Baptiste. Now, there's a beautiful old it really looks more like kind of a Baroque era cathedral down here in the 700 block. That's the church at which Jack Kerouac's funeral was held. Okay.
Excuse me.
Past the church, St. John Baptiste, which on Sunday afternoon seems to swell in size, past City Hall to Kearny Square. Sunday standards, remnants of the little girl gangs who went to shows in new ribbons and pink coats and are now enjoying the last red hours of the show day in the center of the city red brick solitudes by the page clock, the one that we just passed, showing bleak time, to the snaky scrolls and bean sprouts of the Chinese dark interior rich heartbreaking family booth in the restaurant, where I always felt so humble and contrite. The nice smelling Chinese men would really service that food of the smell so savory hung in the linoleum carpet hall downstairs. Now, Kerouac mentions this place in every single one of his Lowell books. So I'd like to think that he probably had a pretty good eating experience here, and he must have eaten here a number of times. In fact, you'll notice that he has a fondness for Chinese restaurants, and I think every Chinese restaurant that he ate subsequent to this one always in some way probably evoked for him a remnant of his experiences here. The family were friends, and every Christmas used to exchange gifts with the Chin Lee family. And so he talks about, like, one year it would be lychee nut, the other year it would be like a great Ming vase that they got and that they brought back, because the family would regularly go back and visit their own family native in China, and they would bring back a lot of the spices, a lot of the foodstuffs that would be used there. So let's go down, guys. We're going to the connection between that clock and Jack Kerouac.
His class dedicated him.
He kissed his girlfriend underneath the clock.
That's where he used to like me. Now, not Maggie Cassidy, not Mary Carney, but Margaret Coffey. There were two MCs in the book. That's where things get a little bit complicated. So it was underneath this clock that Kerouac used to like to meet her after the school day ended. Poor little surreptitious, like nose rubbing and kissing and things like that. In fact, Kerouac's class, which would have been the class of 1939, he graduated on June 21st, 1939. His class and two previous years' classes fundraised and helped actually dedicate this particular clock. It was taken down a couple of years ago, and it's been completely refurbished because supposedly the solder and the stained glass work was really very seriously, kind of deteriorated to the point that it was almost unsafe. Now, I don't know, maybe some of you Lowell natives would know this better than I, but there's actually been talk about how the structural integrity of sections of Lowell High School are such that they may actually end up having to move or rebuild Lowell High School.
Yep.
There are lots of Kerouac sites that are quickly disappearing from our midst, and it would be terrible to actually have this one disappear because, yes, this is where Jack Kerouac attended all 4 years of his high school. He was advanced through a grade. He actually graduated young because he completely skipped 6th grade. The Maris brothers over at St. Joseph's Parochial School were so impressed with Kerouac's intellect and his writing ability in particular that they moved him forward a year. So,
sorry.
Don't go right ahead.
What's an example of another site that's disappearing, and what is the reason?
Well, for instance, you guys know about the grotto?
Oh, right.
Okay. Now, it's not disappearing, but they're kind of reconfiguring the grotto. If there's a site that is maybe more Kerouacian than any other in the city of Lowell, it's that one, because it has that weird mix of kind of mystery and spirituality and kind of twilight visual presence, for lack of a better description, that I think was so important to Kerouac. And some of the most formative moments from Kerouac's very young life took place either in or in proximity to that. So that one, we were all holding our breath, Kerouac fans, because we thought they were just going to destroy it once the property was sold.
Yes.
But they took down the Moody Street Bridge. It used to be the old University Textile Avenue Bridge, which for those of you who never even got to see that, or it's a real loss because Kerouac has another very, very formative scene in his Lowell books that takes place right on that bridge, where he witnesses while walking home with his mother from an evening at the grotto, where his very devout Catholic mother was doing her religious prostration. On the way home, They were walking on the bridge. They got passed by a man carrying a watermelon who literally fell over and dropped dead on the middle of the Moody Street Bridge just in front of them. So one of the Kerouac's first direct experiences of death when he was old enough to kind of recognize what death was. So sites like that, they tore that bridge down a few years ago. There's a beautiful new bridge, but it's a completely different character. They used to call the Moody Street Bridge the Singing Bridge. Okay. So anyhow, in high school, Pauline Cole is my girl. That's Peggy Coffey. I met her under the clock every afternoon after third bell. Dun, 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 dun. Before going there, I hung out at the empty halls, classrooms. Sometimes met Pauline Cole under the clock, which I did every day in December. Now it was January. This is the last time I meet you under our clock. It was a big box-like clock hanging from the wall of the school, donated by some old class when the yellow bricks were new. We had our first trembling meetings under, not just meetings, trembling. When she sang Heart and Soul in the cold night snow of fields, it was the melting of our hearts, we thought, forever. The clock was our big symbol. Well, I'll see you sometime. Not under this clock, kid. Lowell, so the O.B. McClintock firm actually put that up, and I'm not sure if they did the work or even if the firm still exists, but that's one of the vestiges of Kerouac's time here. And Kerouac also writes very, very favorably and rather volubly about his favorite teachers, his favorite classes, and as you might guess, a lot of his favorite teachers were his English teachers. We had one here, a gentleman named Joe Pine, who was very, very influential on some of Kerouac's taste, developing taste in poetry, in more what we call belles lettres, kind of high literature. So let's make our way back down. Bon Marché was, in its day, one of the most popular of all businesses. And oh, by the way, here's just an ad for Candyland, the Dutch tea room, shortly after it opened. But here is Bon Marché. Okay, this is actually in, I believe, the first decade. I believe this is about 1908, turn of the century. But this is Bon Marché back then. Now, the primary interest for this building here in Kerouac history is that in 1950, Jack Kerouac had just had his first novel, The Town and the City, published. Beautiful book. It's not read anywhere near as much as it should be. For a writer to be as young as Kerouac was at the time, to have that those kind of descriptive and narrative gifts. I mean, literally Kerouac's manuscript was over 1,200 pages long, and it was cut down to about 400 or 500 pages, depending on which edition you're looking at. So that was like a real brutal kind of, excision of a lot of text. And Kerouac was always a little bitter about that. That's why he became somewhat stubborn about letting editors, do too much to his text. But anyway, his first novel had been published, and a gentleman named Charles Sampis. Charles Sampis was in fact older brother, a woman named Stella Sampis, who Jack Kerouac would later marry in 1966. She would be his last wife. She always carried something of a torch for Jack. But in 1950, the January 1st, 1950 edition of the Lowell Sun, Charles Sampis published some excerpts from The Town and the City and described the book very clearly as the great Lowell novel. Encouraged by that and prompted by his publisher, Robert Giroux, Jack Kerouac, in late March of 1950, did his only book signing ever here at Bon Marché bookstore here. Now, I shouldn't say bookstore. I mean, they sold pretty much everything from soup to nuts in this place. It was multiple floors. They would have like housewares on one floor. They would have, they had like hardwares on one floor. But anyhow, this is a very, very young Jack Kerouac in this posed promotional photograph. Now, one of the more touching stories about Jack Kerouac's experience. Kerouac was very uncertain, especially after the editing that had been done to the book. Is it still my book? Is it still any good? Is anyone going to care? It didn't sell particularly well, despite some good notices, some good reviews. But Kerouac was actually brought to tears when his good friend Roland Salvis, one of his best friends, he calls him Lousy, in all of the Lowell books, showed up. In fact, Father Spike Morissette, another very important figure in Jack's early development, showed up, and Jack was so excited. But when Lousy, his buddy, one of his best adolescent buddies, showed up, Kerouac broke down into tears. I mean, it was that important to him. It's like, these are the people I want to reach, because these people were in his books. Okay, so it's like, it was important to him to get their validation, because of course sometimes it felt like in the later Lowell books Jack was revealing secrets. Maybe I shouldn't be talking about this. But of course, he was always very, very fair with his friends, and if you ever get an opportunity or you're curious enough to do so, there's a huge audio archive over in the Mogan Center, and all of these old Kerouac friends from his adolescence were interviewed in the late 1970s, and most of them were just like, I have no idea why he thought I was interesting enough to be in a book. Like, literally, I have no idea. And in corresponding with the children of lots of Kerouac's friends, it turns out that most of Jack's friends' children didn't even know their parents had been characters in Jack's books. So it was sort of like their little secret that they kept with one another. It's like, Jack immortalized them in books, and not just, once or twice. Literally every one of his Lowell books he mentions his friends. So his only ever book signing was here. He already had the eyes and ears of the Sampis family, and as you know, he went on to much bigger and better things in his publishing career. So to say, at some point in time while you're in Lowell, if you've never done so, you absolutely must go into the Pollard Library, just walk around that building, okay? I'm thinking since the fire in the first, sometime during the second decade of the 20th century, is really exactly as it has been for the entire, so sections of that library where Kerouac used to go and read, and there's even a Kerouac section up on the second floor, are identical. So it's very much still a Kerouac place.
So Kerouac section is in the back on the left?
It's actually, you got to go up to the second floor, and you kind of go to sort of what would be the north side of the building. Keep on. It's not difficult to find. So they got a nice little section with all the Kerouac books, etc. So, guys, first off, here is City Hall, okay? Kerouac loved describing this city, especially during the nighttime. He also loved the winter. He loved something about having that blanket, that kind of shroud of snow over the city. This is a photograph taken shortly after World War II at Christmas time, which I think captures that kind of sense of, there's something kind of dark, maybe even a little sinister about it, but also festive. Now, this is what I really want to show you, because right here, literally, going down this way, is where the Lowell YMCA used to be. Why do we care about the YMCA? Please, nobody start doing the song that's always embarrassing. I love seeing a bunch of, drunken guys at baseball games, singing the obviously, one of the most flamingly kind of gay songs in history, which I love it. I always sing right along with them. I think this is wonderful. Okay. Why do I mention this? Jack Kerouac's father, okay, early in his time in Lowell, lived in the YMCA. In fact, his father did, the insurance bit down here at Kearny Square, but a very, very short distance. In fact, if you were to draw kind of a street right behind City Hall, kind of parallel to it, there used to be a very small street called Prince, P-R-I-N-C-E, Prince Street. And Prince Street, for a period of time, was where the most popular and famous French-Canadian newspaper in the city, Le Trois, the Star, operated, and the linotype typesetter for that particular business was Leo Kerouac. So the first location of Spotlight Print, when he literally started taking over, was down this small alley, and believe it or not, there is one archival photograph, pretty dingy. It looks like something out of Dickens. It really does, okay? So the first time that Jack Kerouac's father had a printing business, it was actually here. It would later move over to Market Street, just a block over here from Merrimack, okay? It was also called Spotlight Print, and if you look at any really cool old period maps, okay, for instance this one, this is Merrimack Street we're looking at. Here's the library, which is really just behind City Hall. If you go down there just a little bit, you can almost see it, but the remnants of the Royal Theatre are there. Now, 488 Merrimack Street, it's basically just the facade of the building is left. They're going to tear it down very, very soon. So if you're interested at all of the last vestiges of any kind of architecture associated with Kerouac's Lowell Theater, you should go there. Now, why?
To the left?
You stay right on the left side here. You go down about 3 blocks.
Yeah.
You can't miss it. Now, it looks like a condemned building. Okay, so don't like to say, oh, I'm going to go snap a picture behind the front. Like, I wouldn't get that close to it. But right next to it was an alley. Okay, Kerouac describes this. There's this beautiful description in his Lowell books of all of the kind of fire escapes and the catwalks on the side of the building. But his father would make this lonely walk down there, okay, opening right just to the far left now of a Greek restaurant that's on Market Street. That's the exact location of Jack Kerouac's, the first kind of like really legitimate, like Leo Kerouac owned Spotlight print business. It's a very, very humble looking place. Like, this is a photograph from the 1970s, and the doorway going into it looks like it's about ready to fall off the hinges. But bear in mind that this photograph was taken, 40 years after the time when Kerouac filmed it. So this structure, some of it is still left, but that alleyway is soon no longer going to be there. The Royal Theater building will no longer be there. So if you're at all interested in documenting or kind of seeing these places that Kerouac writes about, clearly there are still lots of them left in various kind of configurations. If you're interested, those of you who are maybe like hearing about the Lowell books for the first time, most of them are available in some electronic form. A lot of them are available as like ebooks, things you can read. Obviously, I have a certain amount of text on my tablet here. It's really easy to do search terms. So if you say go to any of Kerouac's Lowell books and just type in the word Keith, or type in Kearney, or type in Merrimack, you will be knocked out how many times he specifically name drops these places. So if supposedly, according to Allen Ginsberg, that Kerouac made all of these sites in Lowell holy by his kind of almost obsessive attention to them, writing about them, memorialized, saving them for us, because without them, now we barely have even the archival photographs. We certainly don't have a lot of the places left. So folks, I'll end things here since we're still within reasonable walking distance of downtown, but if you have any additional questions you'd like to ask, please don't hesitate. Brian Foy will be doing a presentation at, I believe, the schedule, is that at the Worthen? Does anyone remember? It's at the 401, that's right, room 401 in the library. So you might get a chance to go look at, the library if you go there. Brian Foy is one of the early figures, one of the formative figures in LCK here in town. And he's written a very nice little guidebook to Jack Kerouac's Lowell. And of course, Ann Charters will be speaking later. There's the library hooky tour. Bill Walsh knows more about Lowell architecture than any human being out there. In fact, it's almost frightening how much he knows. Don't start talking with Bill about the beach or surfing, though, because I think that's the only thing he likes more than Lowell architecture. So, any other questions? Anything that I can help you guys with? Yeah.
2 quick questions. Did you say the Y was located here?
Yeah, the Y. Literally, that big brick building.
And what was it associated with Jack?
Okay. His father lived here for 2 full years, verging on a 3rd, but also this used to be another one of Jack Kerouac's favorite hiding places. When he would play hooky from school, literally Lowell High buildings are, you can see right from here.
Right.
So he'd make a quick dash over here, go inside, and he'd go to the gym, or he'd go to the workout room. He'd hide somewhere here. And then it was also very conveniently located not too far down here, another theater.
Right.
So it was always like, it was kind of a stopping off point for him. But he was very familiar with it because his father told him about it, and it was very much in operation in Jack Kerouac's day. So.
And my other quick question is, did you say his favorite theater to attend when he had classes was the one on Central Street where we stopped near the canal?
Yes, that one was, because that one was off the beaten track. Okay.
Yes.
Everybody knew that his father had worked for Keith's Theater, for the Royal Theater and Keith's Theater. So if he was going to play, those are the places you'd most expect to find him.
Right.
So when he played hooky and he had to go somewhere where he was pretty sure he wasn't going to be seen, that would be the Strand. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
When you said he immortalized his friends in his books, did he name them exactly, or did he use another name for them?
That's an excellent question. Jack Kerouac always intended to actually, at the end of his life, if he'd lived much beyond his 47 years of age, because he died when he was quite young, he'd intended to actually go back and publish all of his books. One huge book he was going to call the Doulouos Legend. And Doulouos was this name he gave himself, Kerouac Doulouos. He, for reasons of, I think, concerns over privacy and libel, renames all of his friends. Okay? Most of the time, the renamings aren't all that difficult. For instance, one of his best friends during his adolescence was a guy named George John Apostolos. Okay, he renames him Rigopoulos. Okay, not all that much of a stretch. And when he does, so he oftentimes will have the same exact kind of accents, the same number of syllables, and he does that pretty religiously. Now there are a couple of his books, and always in his novels, like his journals and his working notebooks for his various texts, he would use the real names there. But some of the stuff he reveals, for instance, and I don't mean to mention something too salacious, but you actually have a sequence in Dr. Sachs, which has some pretty risque sounding passages, where one of Jack Kerouac's friends, his circle of friends, was this guy who was known for his, well, how do I put this politely? He would chronically self-pleasure, let's put it that way, use your imagination. And he seemed to be able to do it endlessly and would do it in front of people. Well, that wasn't exactly something you wanted a guy's name published in the book. It's so he called him Zaza. It doesn't take all that much digging to discover who Zaza was, and you're like, oh, wow, and you're going, no wonder the guy didn't pay child support in 1946, The Lowell Sun is such a wonderful source because they would publish anything. When Jack Kerouac's sister Caroline went into the hospital to have her appendix taken out, they did a newspaper article. You're like, so anything made it into the Lowell Sun. So yeah, so sometimes the salacious details, Jack was very careful to kind of guard the names a little bit more. And even he would rename his own family. So